and welcome to the Content Advantage, a content talk show about what else? Content for content professionals. I'm Scott Abel, the Content Wrangler, and here's my co-host, Megan Gilhooly.
Hey, Scott, how are you doing?
I'm great, Megan. How are you today?
Very, very good. So, to release the result of its 2020 Technical Documentation Industry Survey later this year. So we have invited the amazing Paul Perrotta, who is the Technical Documentation Wrangler, to give us a preview of some of the findings. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you very much, Megan. It's good to be here.
So good to have you.
Excellent. Go ahead, Megan.
Go ahead. Oh, can we start off by just learning a little bit about you, Paul? I mean, we know how amazing you are, but there are folks in the audience who don't yet know that. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'll do my best. So I am a technical documentation person. I've been in the industry for a little over 30 years. I spent that entire career in Silicon Valley, and I semi-retired not too long ago, but I have my toes in the water, and I work on a ton of different things with the Content Wrangler. And I'm here today to talk about the survey that we developed and ran. And it's got some really exciting information in it, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
Excellent. And before we start today's show, Paul, thanks for joining us. I wanted to let the viewers who may be new to the broadcast know a few things about today's show. First of all, you're not able to be seen or heard. We don't have access to your camera or microphone, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And also, you can ask a question at any time by using the Ask a Questions tab located on your webinar viewing panel. You'll be able to text us a question. We won't be able to text you an answer back, but rest assured that we know, we'll be aware that your question is there. And Megan and I will try to filter those into the show with the time that we have remaining for today's show. Today's show is being recorded. It's planned for 30 minutes. If we go over it all, we'll let you know in time. You'll be able to access a copy of the recording by coming back to the same URL that you're using to watch today's live show. You can actually watch a recording from there. Also, there's additional content available in the attachments and links section of your webinar viewing panel. You click that button, you'll be able to access information provided by the presenter, information about the survey that we're going to be talking about today, and some content from our sponsor, Zoom In Software. At the end of the show, we'll ask you to give us a short rating, letting us know what you thought about the content of today's show. It's a 1 through 5 star rating system. It's super easy to participate. You just click a button on 1 through 5, 5 being the highest rating. There's also a little field where you can tell us why you gave us the rating that you did if you feel compelled to share that information. All right, without further ado, let's tackle this topic today.
Awesome. I'm so excited to hear the results. But before we get there, Paul, could you tell us a little bit about who took the survey?
Yes, actually, that's a really good question. So whenever you give a survey, you have to kind of think about what's going to happen in the survey and who you're talking to. In our case, we targeted technical communicators. We had over 800 respondents from a little over 24 countries. 60% of the firms that we surveyed are located or headquartered in the United States. So it's a little bit skewed, but not as much as you'd think. And we have a lot of people who pay attention to the Content Wrangler in various locations around the world. And we got a lot of really good responses from them. 800 is a very respectable number when you're doing these kinds of things. Of those 800, about 80% were technical communicators of some kind, and they're full-time. The rest of those, maybe a little over 10%, are contractors and consultants, and the rest were part-time workers. So it goes 80%, 10%, rest. Of all the people who responded, of those 800 people, 68% were individual contributors, writers, editors, illustrators, graphics arts people. 23% are managers. That's a surprising number. It's a high number, and that includes people managers and domain managers. So domain managers are people who are project managers, for example, or program managers. That would be included there. Then another 7% are senior managers, managers of managers, directors, or vice presidents. That is a huge number, 7%, because those positions did not exist 10 years ago. in case you weren't around then. We didn't have, you could walk into an HR shop at various companies and they would tell you there's no such thing as a VP of information development or of technical communication or of user experience. That doesn't exist. And in fact, we don't even have a director of that. The most you can ever be is a senior manager. And that's, I actually had an HR person tell me that.
That's interesting in itself, right? That whole trend toward this being more respected as part of the everyday mechanics of business.
Sure. I think that there's a few things that lead into that. One of the interesting things is I think a lot of it is due to just having a phone, because the phone is the way everybody interacts with so many different parts of our businesses and our personal lives. And everybody recognizes now that that experience, the user experience, when it goes wrong is really poor and reflects on the company. When it's right, it greases the skids and lets you get to what you want to do in a minimal amount of time. And I think we carry over that experience with other parts of our work. And I think as a result, we see some recognition of the fact that that is important in the business, not just in the presentation. And I think that's a very important development. So I said 68% are ICs, 23% are managers, 7% are senior managers and higher level people in the management chain, and the rest are information architects, UX designers, taxonomists. Some of the newer information development terms and roles that we've talked about when we talk about technical communication that we don't necessarily see very often, they're still represented in this survey. So as a result, I think the survey is a good cross-section of technical communication as an industry and as a community.
And Paul, it's not a scientific survey either, right? We're really just trying to gauge what people believe to be true about their jobs. And sometimes we ask questions where they may not be the domain expert. For example, we ask, sometimes we ask questions about what foreign languages they translate their content into. And some people are very aware of how many languages their content is translated into, and others not so much, because they're not part of that process, right? They kind of take their content that's finished and they pass it on to the next group of people, and they may be unaware of how many people work over there, what tools they use, and whether they have terminology management or not, all that kind of in-depth thing. So we didn't really go into that much detail in this particular survey. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't discourage retired folks or educators or students from participating, but we did not include their results in the findings because they're not representing a technical documentation team, right? They're part of the overall industry, but they're not the focus of our survey. Is that correct?
That's right. It is not a scientific survey. We did not go out and verify information. This is really self-reporting. It's merely meant to talk about trends, data points along those trends, to talk about how we feel, to give some self-reporting about what we think is going on in the industry, especially in times of a pandemic, which I think certainly dominates the news cycles here in the United States and does in other places too, but also has an effect on how we work with one another. The fact that we can do this call, we didn't do this 15 years ago or 10 years ago.
It's not good, even if we tried.
Right.
It was really, we had to struggle. So for the viewers that are watching the program, there's a written report that'll be produced in the month of December that'll be made available to everybody who took the survey and completed it. If you'd like to complete the survey after today's show's over, you can go to the attachments and links section of the webinar viewing panel, where there should be a link to the survey, and you can follow along the instructions. It's easy, it's multiple choice, only takes a few minutes, less than 5 usually, to complete the survey. We've trimmed the questions down so it's very small set of questions. It's pretty painless to take the survey. Additionally, it should be noted that we ask a question at the end of the survey asking if people would mind being contacted by for a follow-up interview. And so we did have a certain percentage of the 800 respondents who said, yes, please call me later and ask me questions about my results. So we'll try to incorporate over the next few months into the new year some stories from people that resulted from their interaction with the survey, because some people had some pretty interesting things to say, and we wanted to follow up on that, but we will not include that today. We just wanted to let you know. All right, so Paul, why don't we start, and you could share your screen and show us the first results, and we'll talk a little bit about that first question.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about beliefs. You know, the truth matters, and we're supposed to be based on science. Technical communication professionals, as professionals, we rely on science to guide the decisions that we are making, because that makes a difference. How we allocate funds, resources, people is important, and we have to understand the basis for which we're doing those things and what the results might be, because you have to figure out, if you're going to ask a question, what are you going to do with the answer? Right. And you can't just ask questions all the time, because nobody will hire you after a while. So we asked one of the questions about learning styles. So I'm going to switch over to a screen here. Let's see if this works.
Excellent. Let's see if technology is on our side today. Woohoo! We're making progress.
Did it work?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Yes.
Look at that. That is gorgeous graphic design right there, if I say so myself. It says here that the survey is brought to you by Precision Content. This particular talk show is sponsored by ZoomIn, though, and I wanted to make sure that we all knew that.
Thank you.
The question, the question today, or in the survey, how much do you agree with the following statement? I learn best when information is presented to me in ways that align with my learning style. So we're asking about learning style, and we're asking, do you believe what your learning style is? And the answers below are seeing, or listening, or reading and writing, or touching and doing. So those are the learning styles. 42% strongly agree that they learn best when information is presented to them in ways that align with their learning style, which means they learn best. They either learn faster, they learn more deeply, or they are more engaged with the material, and as a result, learn more than something that's not in their learning style. 36% agree. 12% somewhat agree. For a total of 90% of the respondents in our survey believe that they learn best when information is presented to them in ways that align with their learning style. So that's a really interesting question, and it's really interesting for a lot of reasons, but probably the most important reason is there's no scientific evidence at all that learning styles even exist. We all believe that, and it's kind of interesting that 90% of us believe that learning styles are a thing, and that you learn better when presented with information from one learning style than another. And the research simply does not support that. And in fact, it's been called one of the most pervasive myths about cognition that we know of. When people do research like this, they do so across cultures, across languages. There have been over 30 studies recently about this, and it sustains the very same conclusion every time. There's no such thing as learning style. And that's kind of a problem, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing, Paul, is that I did a little research on this too, because I was so mesmerized by the fact that 90% of technical communicators, who often are using science to make decisions about what they do and the way they produce content and how they manage it, would believe this. But then after I did research, I realized that there were many academic studies that asked the same kind of question, but a few of them dove deeper, just a few, and they tried to figure out why people believe this. And the first thing that they found was it's not unique to English-speaking countries or the United States. This is not a US problem. It's actually worldwide. From China to India and European countries, Southeast Asian countries, even Latin American countries were included. And 85 to 90% of people, just consumers, when presented with a similar question, answer it the same way. They actually really do believe that they have a learning style and that they could learn better if that information was presented to them that way. But there's no scientific evidence that matching instruction to someone's self-declared learning style actually positively impacts their ability to learn new information. Didn't we learn from our research that it was actually a combination, right? But let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's, sorry about that. We did learn that it's a combination. When people say they learn best by reading and writing, for example, or they learn best by touching and doing, what they're really saying, when you analyze what they're doing, they're listening, they're seeing, they're reading and writing, they are using kinesthetic approaches to help them cement the memory of the material that they're trying to move. It's really a combination of those things, and that combination varies in terms of strength. So when you're learning one topic versus another, it really does depend what it is you're doing at the time. But for some people, they learn better when they focus merely by listening. And even though they say they only learn by touching and doing, that's just not true. And you can go through and look at what people say they're doing versus what they're doing. And there's a big discrepancy there.
So I want to make sure that we're given the right information here. So we obviously have some sort of a Likert scale here that goes from strongly agree, presumably down to strongly disagree, right? And so 10% were in disagreement. Was there an option to say, I don't have a specific learning style or anything like that here?
There was the other button, and some people typed in that there's no such thing as a learning style. That would be the 10% of the people that did not select any of these answers. There was also somewhat disagree or whatever, but that's not it. 90% of the people agree. That was the big message.
Yeah.
And then the other box was the next common answer, and that's where people typed in there's no such thing, or I don't think this is a relevant question. but that was because they thought that we believed. So the perception was that we must not know, the survey people must not know that learning styles are not a thing. Some people even bailed out of the survey after this first question and sent us an email saying, I can't continue to take your survey because you're pushing an idea that's not true.
Yeah.
They didn't understand our intent, right, of this question. And what we wanted to do was gauge whether technical writers believe things that aren't true.
Yeah.
It turns out they do.
Yeah. And it's interesting here, but if we look at the idea of learning style, people could read that differently, right? And so I think you have some more data that shows specifically what type of learning style relating directly to seeing, listening, reading and writing, touching and doing, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we do a little bit. Shall we go on to that?
Yes.
So we asked a follow-up question then. I learn best by, and it will be one of the options you see in the middle of the screen. 21% said they learn best by seeing, 4% by listening, 30% by reading and writing, and 39% by touching and doing. So that's a pretty big spread. And the notable piece here is 4% is the low guy on the totem pole, right?
Yeah.
And that has a really interesting thing, because if you notice, when in other parts of the survey we asked what kind of formats people are publishing to, it's not podcasts, it's not listening to that sense. And the question is there a reason for that? I think it's a really good question.
So if this is a myth, what impact does this myth really have on the folks who are watching? What myth does it?
Belief in learning style, that's a good question. Belief in learning style has consequences. Teachers, for those of you with kids, you realize that your teachers spend time catering to the learning styles of individual students, and they are told, if you have reading and writing people or people who are kinesthetic, who learn by doing stuff, you need to present stuff in this way. But that's not true. They're setting up a teaching program that does that when those things aren't really true. Students choose to study in ways that align with their perceived learning style, even though it's incorrect, and they don't realize that they're not getting the full impact of what it is that they're learning, because they're only going down one thing. If I only learn by seeing and I don't learn by touching and doing, I cut myself out of touching and doing, and that actually probably would help, because we find that people, when they're exposed to many different modes, all of these modes, they do have a better experience. There are certification programs out there that cater to this. They'll say, oh, this is only for people who read and write stuff. You don't have to listen to anything. There are services that have been developed to deliver training programs along these lines, and companies rely on assessments of their employees. They actually go through and assess their employees and say, oh, they only learn by seeing and listening, so we're only going to present course material and content in those ways. Well, that just seems odd, given that learning style doesn't exist.
Well, and to write the report, sorry, just a second. To write the report, Paul, I've had to research all these things, right? What I did find was teachers with their own blogs explaining why they teach in the way that they do in accordance with learning styles. What we didn't find was any links to any scientific proof. They're not like referencing a peer-reviewed education journal. They're just saying that in their personal experience, they believe. And they're doubling down on this because they say, I'm in a classroom full of children. Of course, I know what I'm doing. I'm a teacher. I'm observing them. This student is better when they listen. This student is better when they see. But when they put students into a test environment and they try to determine which learning style they believe would be the best for learning, they test them against different learning methods, right? And so if that means that if you believe that you're better at seeing, you should score highest when you receive information that's visual. But it turns out that you might indeed do better on a test by listening. And so it turns out that it's not true. Your prediction about how you might learn best is really more of a preference, they say. The other thing that I thought was interesting was I also found our trade association, the Society for Technical Communication, if you search their website, you will not find the STC, Society for Technical Communication, saying anything about learning styles, but you will find content from so-called experts that are doing webinars and such, where they occasionally touch on this learning style myth and they further make it seem more valid. The other thing I found was services provided by training companies, trying to hook companies into this learning style myth where they can come in and teach you how to better train, like HR teams, train people with new skills. And all those things are impacting how we think, I think. I don't think they're destroying the technical communication industry by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But what if
what I think is happening here is humans love to categorize things, right? We just do. I mean, there's psychology says that we take comfort in categorizing things to add meaning, but that also adds risk. And the risk here, I think, is that once somebody knows, and I know people that do this, they think that they learn the best, let's say, by touching and doing. And so they develop the touching and doing muscles, and they completely ignore the others. So then they get better at touching and doing and learning through that. And they get worse at listening, let's say, because they're not doing it as much. So I think the takeaway here is we need to ensure that everybody gets all of these things and learns to develop these different ways of consuming information.
Yeah, the scientists that studied the students said that when students were presented with multiple modalities of learning, the preference that they had was irrelevant. It was their test scores went up the more they were exposed to different channels of information. When they got a lecture, plus some visual material, plus they did a hands-on exercise, which seems to be the way somebody teaches in a workshop. I mean, you've been to the workshop where they introduce something by talking about it for a minute, then they make everybody stand up and do something, and then we go and write some stuff. And I think it's that commonality, right? So I guess we could learn from that too and become better at how we present information to other people.
Right. I do want to make sure that we're sensitive, though, to folks that have disabilities. For example, my daughter is developmentally delayed, and we have had her tested. And when she gets an auditory cue, it doesn't register. And so while we don't want to make a preference for how we do learn, there are sometimes disabilities that prevent us from learning in certain ways, whether that's, you're not a seeing person, or you're not a hearing person, or the connection between your ears and your brain aren't working, but between your eyes and your brain are. So I think there are some cognitive and scientific reasons to consider this, but I think it's on the flip side of what you're talking about.
And the researchers were very clear that this is about personal preference. So somebody who has a disability would not, if you're blind, you're not going to say that you prefer to see.
Right.
And learn that you learn best when you see, because you're blind and you wouldn't be able to do that. They were clear that this is about people's personal beliefs, and they're called essentialists. They actually are linking this to the fake news kind of thing, where people believe things and then even after it's explained to them, they double down on it. And it's often because they believe they were born a certain way. So if you believe that you were born, you were left-handed and you can draw, and nobody else in your family can draw lifelike figures, and you might start to believe that you're more of a visual learner or whatever. And they're saying those connections don't hold true when you test people. So I think that's really the only message here, is that if you're going to talk about preferences, they're great to have. Everybody should be able to have information in the way that they prefer, but they may not learn best that way. So I just thought it was an interesting thing that technical communicators believe this. For balance, we ask a second question about belief, which we won't talk about today, but all of our viewers can get a copy of the report that comes out in December, and they can read all about it, where it was the opposite was true. We presented a myth and we expected people to jump in just like they did here and go along with it, but they didn't, because they knew that that thing wasn't true, and that it's been talked about so much in the industry. That's why we thought it was important to talk about learning styles, because once it's debunked, the numbers should change. And over time, researchers who studied this for a long time have felt that way. Paul, why do researchers think people believe in these things erroneously?
It comes down to it comes down to an essentialist interpretation. You already talked about that a little bit. That things that the way we learn have a biological or genetic basis, and that they're instantiated in the brain and you can't change it. And obviously, with learning styles, that's not true, because people have a much more full-bodied way of learning and how they approach new tasks and different tasks. There's no single reason that people point to for this. It really is a combination of things. The research is really not complete. It illustrates a lot of the different ways that people move forward, and it's fascinating to see how it plays out, because it's not what I would have expected at all.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this, because I know we want to move on to the other points, but there are other things that people believe in, and it's not tech writers alone, by the way. When the researchers did this research amongst consumers in different countries, it still was 85 to 90% of people believe that they learn best with certain learning styles. But there's also a similar percentage of people who believe that pit bulls are by nature aggressive and will, misbehave and attack people, and that they have super canine strength, like they can lock their jaws and no other animal can escape or whatever. These are all myths that are all believed by people. And yet when they show you that that's not true about those particular types of dogs, in other words, they're not born that way, it's difficult for people to see through their fear of the dog and see the science. And so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think that relates a bit to the cognitive bias of confirmation bias, right? So we hear that pit bulls are really aggressive and that people die. And then as soon as you see in the paper somebody died because a pit bull was aggressive, then we go, oh, see, I was right. And I think the same thing goes with learning style. Like, some pit bulls are aggressive, but you know what? Some Labradors are aggressive too. But with learning styles, when you think you learn better in a certain way, and then you do effectively learn something in that way, then you look to that and go, oh, see, that's confirmed. But when you learn something else in a different way, you don't necessarily confirm a bias that you already have.
Yeah, you don't just confirm. Yeah.
Right.
Excellent. Well, this may be a good time to stop for just a second. And Megan, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about Zoom In Software, our sponsor of today's show?
Absolutely. So what Zoomin does is we ingest technical product content from any source, no matter where it was created or how it was published, structured, and we deliver it in multiple places. We deliver it into a state-of-the-art documentation portal. We can deliver it to your community, to your customer service site. We can even deliver it directly inside your product itself. And so this way, customers can self-serve more efficiently, and organizations can reduce support costs and improve product adoption.
Excellent, excellent. And there are lots of people who are trying to do that, especially today with the situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, and more people needing to find answers to questions quickly in situations that are not always most optimal. So I'm sure Zoomin can help in a lot of ways there. Hey, Paul, let's take a look at our second survey question about COVID-19. And before we do, I'll let some of the audience members know that, yes, if you take the survey, your response will be included in the survey report. So if you use the attachments and links section of your webinar viewing panel and you stumble into a link to the survey, feel free to go take it later today, and your results will be included in our December report. If you'd like to be contacted as a follow-up, just indicate so in the survey, and we may give you a jingle one day and ask your opinion about some of these questions. Okay, Paul, let's dive into the COVID-19 pandemic questions.
Okay, so this was kind of interesting too. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, are you working from home? 94% of the people said yes. I think that is an astonishing number. 94% of the over 800 people that we surveyed or who responded to our survey say they are now working from home as a result of COVID-19. 3% say they are not working from home, meaning they either have to come in because their jobs require it or their company doesn't let them work from home. And 3% are 50-50. They come in from home and they come to the office and they work from home, and it's a combination of that.
Wow.
Working from home prior to the pandemic were 15% already. So these are the people whose companies were said, yeah, you can work from home or work from home part-time. So we have to acknowledge that was there already. But I find this really striking because you rarely see something that says 94% of something goes a certain way. And I think what this says is that companies around the world are responding in similar ways, probably at the behest of governmental entities or health organization recommendations that say you need to do this. My expectation is that as we move through the pandemic, these numbers would change. Some people will go into the office more often, some will not. The question, we have follow-up questions in the survey that we're not going to talk about today that say, what would you prefer? And I think they're really interesting. If you want to see the answers to that, make certain that you take the survey so that you can get the results.
And they'll come out later this year for people who are just joining us, and also people who are asking questions in the chat room. Please know that we do not answer you back. So, I'll repeat again that you can take the survey and we'll give you the results in December.
So this is interesting. If a year ago you had told me this would be the case, I would have said no way. But as of today, knowing what I know now, this doesn't surprise me. So it's interesting how quickly this turned around. I guess the big question is, how quickly will this go back to something a little bit more normal, right? I don't think we're ever going to go back to the numbers that we had before, but how close will we get and when will we get there? And those are big unknowns.
If 15% is the normal, let's say before the pandemic, 15% of the tech writers communities were working from home, then will that number go up? If I were to go back in our archives from 10 years ago or so, I would guess, and this is purely my psychic power right now and my poor memory, that we didn't ever ask a question like this. What we asked was, are you allowed to work remotely? And, we were trying to gauge whether or not people, when the remote trend started, it was very Silicon Valley based, and we were trying to determine whether it expanded from there. And it turns out back then it was probably 5 or 6%. There weren't very many people who were allowed to work from home. Some people said they could work from home sometimes, but it wasn't really like a full-time gig at home. So that's very interesting as well. For our viewers that are watching, we're going over our time limit of 30 minutes. So if you've got to dive off the call because you've got other commitments, please know you can return to the same URL you're using to watch this show today live, and it will turn into a recording later today, and you can watch that on demand or share it with others. All right, Paul, let's move on to the next question here, and let's see where we land.
Okay, next question then. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, was your team working to transform itself by adopting new tools and techniques for producing content? The context for this question is that we know that there are a lot of digital transformation initiatives going on through the industry. It's not just focused on technical communication. It's focused on huge swaths of company functions, marketing, for example, the finance organizations, sales organizations. How do you integrate them? How do you get real-time data on the fly so that you can make better decisions earlier in the process? And part of that has to do with technical communication. How does content move through the system? And in that context, what we found out was that 69% before the pandemic were working on some kind of digital transformation or some kind of transformation that they were either attempting to adopt, were in the middle of adopting, were evaluating, trying to find techniques for producing content more efficiently, faster, and doing more with the same number of resources that they have today. 22% said they were not working on those things, but 69% said they were. And I think that that's a really interesting number because it talks to the fact that we are all required to improve what it is that we do. Most companies want all their teams to improve what they do, to be more efficient, to use tools wisely. And the question is, are we going to allot money and time and effort to go do those things? 69% of our people before the pandemic said that they were. So the question, of course, that's really interesting is, what's the answer during the pandemic? Any guesses?
Well, one might think, I mean, it can go either way, right? One might think it would be, oh no, everybody's fearful of this pandemic, and so we're going to be safe and we're going to save our budget money and cancel off some things we were planning on doing. But the other side of me says there might be some utility in continuing. So I'm interested in this result as well.
Yeah. Well, the answer, it's the same. Now, that doesn't mean the same people are doing that. It just means 69% of the respondents are, during the pandemic, still working to transform themselves. So what that says is we have, to me, that's really good news. It means that we expect the pandemic to end, that we expect our companies still to exist at the end of it. We expect the jobs to be there, and that we are continuing the transformation work, and we have allocated time, money, effort to go do those things. And you wouldn't expect people who are working from home, 94% of whom are working from home, doing this kind of work. That presents lots of challenges for teams in general. They are management challenges. How do you work with people that you don't see every day? How do you coordinate work to make it better? And it says that people are continuing to do that. It does not talk about, are the timeframes different or is the scope lessened? It just says, yes, we still recognize this as a business priority. And I find this astonishing. I think that this is, one, really good news for the industry, but two, it says that the business need is still there. We recognize that, and we're still going forward. And I think that that's a very positive message.
Absolutely. I see this. Our business has not slowed down at all. In fact, it's probably picked up. So I wonder what would be interesting to me, and maybe this was one of the questions, is has the transformation that they're doing changed? Meaning, did it change from transforming the people on the team to bringing on more self-service tools? Or did it go the other way where they now have to invest more in their people because they've lost people and they're less likely to put budget towards tools? I'd be interested.
I think that's a very good point, Megan. I'd also be interested in knowing, let's say they were going to transform the way they publish content and they were going to undertake a intelligent content approach, for example, and segment all their content and modularize it and produce it in XML. That's a lot of work. And maybe at the time they didn't think there was a pandemic and they thought, hey, we're healthy, we have budget, we have people, we've got time and customers, let's go ahead and do this. And now the pandemic came. I wonder if there's also sometimes, let's stop that project and shift more to a security solution that we can get quick results, self-service, for example, and be able to use a tool like Zoom In would help them do that. It'll be interesting what, if we follow up in February or March with the same people to figure out whether or not the confidence is still there, especially with all the changes taking place around the world in the way that we deal with the pandemic and the possibility for vaccines and all of that. It's really going to change the way that business leaders feel about how they should spend their money. So that should be really interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We did ask questions, Megan. We did follow up a little bit about that. Some of the questions we asked were, have you lost your job as a result of the pandemic? Has your pay gone down? Did you take a pay cut? Did your bonus get stopped? And those answers will be in the result, in the report as well. But it's very enlightening to see how different companies responded and how they continue to respond. You would expect with something like a pandemic that has lots of uncertainty. We don't even know if we're going to exist.
Right.
We hear all the time about commercial concerns that have to fold because of this. We didn't see that in our survey so far.
Yeah.
Now,
It's really amazing. We have customers who are laying people off because they're having a hard time getting through this. And then we have other customers that are sort of like we are going gangbusters and hiring like crazy. And so we've actually taken upon ourselves to create a job board just for Zoom In customers so that if these folks are getting laid off and these folks are hiring, we can introduce the two. And I think I think there are things like that any company can really do to kind of help out, because once you have Zoom In skills, they transfer to another company, right? Or once you have data skills, they transfer. So there are things that we can do in this world that I think we never would have thought of a year ago. A year ago, I never would have said, yeah, I would have built a job board, right? But today, it totally makes sense. So I love that you guys are pulling this data. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I'd love to see it at the 6-month mark. I know you don't do it for another year, right? But the 6-month mark might be interesting.
Well, we may have to change too, right? We're transforming the way that we do shows. We're transforming the way we hold conferences in our industry. We're transforming the way we train our employees. So who knows? I thought anything's possible.
Yeah.
And I think from this data, I could think of 10 different surveys and 10 different more things that I would want to go find out. It really is, we designed it to be short and to take less than 5 minutes to take. And we can time how long it takes people to do. It's about 5 minutes. If I had an hour, I would love to dive in and say, what are you really thinking about this? What does your job prospect look like? How are promotions being handled? What are you getting from since you're online all the time, many people reported in the survey that they're spending more time in Zoom than they were before. Well, the work still has to get done. So what's going on there, and how are companies responding? And I think there's a lot of positive work going on there that says, yeah, we recognize you're doing this, have a day off. You can have this extra time. Here's some extra bennies that we're doing. Not all companies can do that, but many companies can. And I think it talks to the fact that people are recognizing that there's a context for this, and that they have to be careful of the people involved, because the people are the resources that allow the company to go forward in the first place. And I think that realization is starting to, I see the theme throughout our survey here, and I can think of a half dozen more things that we could go explore.
two things that really came into mind when I started to read the high-level results of the survey was, first of all, our industry seems really healthy. Now, keep in mind, it's not a scientific survey. People self-selected to take this survey. People are on a mailing list or in a group that they joined on purpose, and that means they tolerate, getting all these messages from different people. And some people are not that way, so maybe those people aren't in our survey. But most of them were not naysayers. I found that to be really interesting, that most people had a positive view. They were really hopeful. They were forward thinking. They were not necessarily scared. Uncertainty was definitely part of the mix. I would say that's fair to say, but it wasn't really fear-based or negative. And I've also heard feedback, Megan, from other vendors that the RFP process is robust today, which for people who are not in sales, that means that lots of people are asking for quotes for software and services. And that means that there's a possibility for sales, which means that there's a market out there that's looking for products and solutions that technical communicators would fill the bill for producing the content with. So there's a healthy, robust economy so far that will support technical communication. And fingers crossed, we're going to be in the same place in a few months when we ask those questions again.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's very positive, and I was really surprised to see that. I really expected it to be far more negative, and it was pleasantly surprising to see people say, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable, I'm doing things differently, but I still believe at the end of the day I have a job, and I'm being paid, and I'm working on things that the company says are important. Those are all positive messages, and they're worth amplifying.
Absolutely.
Did a good job of that today. We gave some positives, and we showed people a little bit of a peek into the data that we collected. For those of you that are on the show or just joined us late, you can use the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel to access information about our sponsor of today's show, Zoom Software, as well as get a link to the survey, so that if you'd like to pitch in your 5 minutes and share your 2 cents worth, you can click a few buttons in a multiple choice survey and be added to the data collection that we're doing. We're going to produce a report with some more in-depth information aimed at helping you understand why these results might mean something and what you can do about it. That report will be released in December, and anybody who completes the survey will automatically receive a copy via email of the survey results report. And you'll probably hear more about it later when we return to going to conferences, whenever that might be. We'll deep dive into some of those topics.
Very nice. And just so everyone knows enough, we really want to hear what you thought of today's show. So please use that Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel. Give us a 1 to 5 star rating, leave any comments. We go through every single comment, so definitely leave those. We love to hear them.
Excellent. And before you go today, let's give a thank you. Megan and I are going to thank Paul for joining us today. So thank you,
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Audience members, let's tell you a few things are coming up here. So we have a rescheduled show that was originally scheduled for about a week ago, and we had some technical difficulties. However, we've rescheduled it, and we're going to have the Empress of Content Strategy, Rahel Ann Bailey, come and talk to us on Tuesday, November the 17th. Megan and I will interview Rahel about her research on content strategy. She went back and did a deep dive, kind of a history, and she's going to talk about the past of content strategy, where we came from, where we are today, and where she sees things going tomorrow. I think that'll be a very interesting show. You're not going to want to miss that one. And then the following week, we're going to interview Sonia Daines from HealthWise. She's going to come and talk about how the organization she works for uses structured content to power their educational portal, healthwise.org, and how they serve up that information to the customers that they serve. It'll be a super interesting show, and for those of you who are interested in structured content, you're not going to want to miss that one. All right, well, thank you to our audience members for joining us today. Until we see you again, stay safe, be well, and keep doing good work. And I'll see you again on the next issue of the Content Advantage Talk Show with Megan Gilhooly and Scott Abel. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.